The Matrix Resurrections is actually a film about trauma and how to deal with it. Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, the Viking, and let's talk about how The Matrix Resurrections beautifully conveys trauma. What's up, guys? Make sure you subscribe to the channel, give a thumbs up, check out my Matrix Resurrections review and also my Matrix Resurrections explained video. And then yesterday we got confirmation that Warner Brothers wants to make a Matrix 5. Check out those videos on the channel if you're interested. But I love the Matrix Resurrections. But when many critics got to see the movie early, they said that this film was a comedy. It was very funny, and it was. It had some very comedic moments. But the parts that were supposed to be funny were when we get to see Neo, Thomas Anderson, in this new Matrix, and he's actually depressed. He lives the same day over and over again. He goes to a therapist who is called the analyst. He takes the blue pill every single day. He feels like something is not right about the environment that he's in, which leads to him being awoken by Morpheus. But with films like The Matrix Resurrections, you have people who watched it once, they call it shit. Okay, I watched it the first time, I liked it, watched it the second time, third time, fourth time, I'm picking up new things, and now I love the movie. Probably the best pieces of art in film are the ones that are very controversial, are very split down the middle in terms of opinions. And art can be subjected in a number of different ways. Your life experiences make you see the world in the way that you do right now. And we all have different experiences, so we interpret movies, art, sport, politics, life differently from one another. And I want to read an interesting article by a woman named Amelia Vanderwerf. She writes this for thevox.com. Too many movies right now are about trauma. The Matrix Resurrections actually does the work. I'm watching Thomas Anderson going through this cycle of repeating the same day over and over again. I related to the character. I felt for the character. I was sad for the character because I think we've all gone through something like that with anxiety, with depression, with not knowing their purpose in life. And I think we can relate to that, and I did with Thomas Anderson in those scenes. And this woman who wrote this article related to a lot of it. And that's what I'm talking about, different experiences in life and different interpretation of art. And what she had to say, I agree with a lot of it. Some of it I disagree because I can't relate to it because I haven't gone through things like that. But in this article, I've gone through things very similar to this woman as well. The Matrix Resurrections' take on trauma therapy is more nuanced than it seems at first. Thomas Anderson's world is unraveling before his very eyes. He knows that he put a lot of himself into Neo, the protagonist of his groundbreaking Matrix trilogy of video games. But he's starting to think that the stories of those games aren't fiction. He's starting to think that he really did live in a simulation, and machines really are trying to keep him from realizing the truth of his existence. This unraveling culminates in an action sequence when a new incarnation of Morpheus, who again Anderson thinks is a character in a video game he created, faces off with a new incarnation of Agent Smith. While Thomas cowers behind a desk, terrified, insisting the fight isn't happening, Matrix fans will recognize all of these characters are coming from the original series. But outside of Keanu Reeves as Thomas Anderson Neo, the actors playing them are new. It's neatly discombobulating in a way that mimics Thomas's confusion about his own reality. Yes, we in the audience know there's probably a new Matrix. We know the title of the movie we're watching after all. But we're also stuck in a space where we're not yet sure how the pieces fit together. And since Thomas too knows the rough story of the original Matrix, albeit as a video game, both he and we are going through roughly the same thing. All of us want answers. We're not getting them just yet. Yet, just the scene reaches its apex, just as Thomas is about to realize he's Neo and break free of his simulated shackles, he finds himself in his therapist's office. His therapist, Neil Patrick Harris, tells him to focus on the details in the space around him. The feel of his jeans against his hands, the seat against his body. He's being reminded of traumatizing incidents, the therapist says, and his brain has conjured up a narrative to explain them. Wait, I thought, is this movie about me? The Matrix Resurrections doesn't give us a lot of time in Neo's therapy sessions, but the use of grounding exercises, the therapist asking Neo to feel the roughness of his jeans, etc., and the emphasis on separating traumatic thoughts from what's really happening are highly reminiscent of something called cognitive processing therapy, albeit a version that's been simplified for a movie. Cognitive processing therapy is a highly regimented form of therapy. It progresses along a specific path designed to get trauma survivors not to overcome their dark memories, which is not really possible, but to find a way to separate past from present. In the midst of a traumatic flashback, your brain more or less forgets when it is. Instead, it begins to re-experience the events as though they were happening in the present, which can place you in danger. CPT uses common therapeutic tactics like grounding to jolt the brain back into the present. I can't be stuck in my childhood bedroom in the past because I'm in my apartment in California in 2021. And I'm petting my furry black and white cat. And I'm under a bright orange blanket. The better a survivor gets at reorientating themselves in the present, the more able they are to use those tactics to reduce the hold their trauma has over them. The goal, as I understand it, is to properly recontextualize one's trauma, to shrink it down enough that you can reclassify it as something horrific that happened to you. The tense is important. It happened. It is no longer happening. You have escaped its clutches. But I also don't understand the goals of CPT. Not really. My therapist is currently using CPT to help me move past some pretty severe childhood trauma stemming from abuse. I know it's working. I know I'm exiting 2021 in a much better place than I entered it. Maybe that should be enough. But I also feel a primal need to know what's happening. I have done enough research into CPT to understand what my therapist is doing, but reading about these techniques is very different from experiencing them. The effect of CPT is very much like talking yourself out of believing the simulation is real because that's what's really happening. Your brain has conjured up something terrifying. You talk yourself out of the past and back into the present. So when Neo's therapist uses common trauma therapy techniques to convince Neo that his experiences in the Matrix are just traumatic hallucinations and regurgitations of past events, he really doesn't understand. When we know he's stuck in the Matrix, just what is this movie trying to say about trauma therapy? These are two possible readings of the Matrix Resurrections' take on trauma therapy, one of which is kind of gross and one of which is incisive, and not only about trauma therapy. I lean more toward the latter reading, but it's worth examining why we might read the take as just as a little gross. Broadly speaking, Resurrections is about systems of control that are used to keep us blinded to the nature of reality. For instance, the system of control that keeps Trinity from accessing her full power is her family. She's so focused on keeping up with her husband and kids that she loses sight of anything about them. The movie is not saying having a family is bad. It is saying that making any one thing, including your family, the only thing in your life, is an easy path to losing sight of the ways in which you are capable of working with others to change the world. These systems of control are everywhere in Resurrections, and the one that seems most specifically tied to Neo is therapy. For much of the movie, Neo's therapist seems to play into an unfortunate but probably harmless trope. The therapist in the sci-fi or fantasy movie who exists to convince the protagonist they're not superpowered, or not really an alien, or not actually the reincarnation of King Arthur or something. Where the trope gets muddled is when Neo's therapist turns out to be the movie's main villain, a successor to the first trilogy's architect, known as the analyst. Both the architect and analyst built their own versions of the Matrix, and both relied on Neo to keep their mattress running. But where the architect was a stuffy old man in a suit, the analyst uses the language of modern therapy session. He says that Neo seems very triggered. He encourages Neo not to use the word crazy, and he literally prescribes blue pills. I do not have to work very hard to take this character and use him to say some pretty reductive things about the uselessness of therapy, or all the ways the current generation is too coddled. The literal text of the Matrix Resurrections is inviting you to do just that. It's almost daring you to believe that modern therapeutic practices are designed to blind you from the harsh truths underpinning reality. You need to wake up. You can imagine this version of the movie saying, "The world is a mess, and fixing it is more important than your feelings." Except this movie was made by Lana Wachowski, one of the most sincere directors working right now. If anyone was going to make a movie about how fixing the world requires feeling all your feelings, it would be her. There's more going on here. When I first started grappling with being a trauma survivor, I looked around for stories in pop culture I could find some sort of solace in. Stories where I might see myself reflected. I really thought I wouldn't have too much trouble. We're living through a gold rush of movies and TV shows that proclaim they are really about trauma. Whether it's every other Marvel project or the new Halloween movies, somebody on the creative team will be right there to insist that you understand how central trauma is to storytelling. But few of these movies or shows spoke to me in any capacity. In my experience, these projects often cheapen trauma. Many superhero stories, for instance, correctly understand that the world-shattering events the characters lived through and the sheer stress of having to save humanity so many times would eventually have serious psychological consequences. But because these are superhero stories, those consequences are usually turned metaphorical into something that can be punched. I often find the mere attempt to make these stories about trauma vaguely insulting, as though the word trauma is a coat of paint being used to give the stories a veneer of seriousness they didn't remotely earn. But The Matrix Resurrections did speak to me on some deeply affecting level. Specifically, it seemed like it was talking about trauma in a way that hit me on a bone-deep level. That response confused me, because the scenes in which the movie explicitly talked about trauma felt so antithetical to my entire therapeutic journey. The Matrix Resurrections is consciously in conversation with modern blockbuster culture. Its entire first act is, in essence, a digressive meditation on why we might want a new entry in any long-running blockbuster franchise. And the very first scene is a largely faithful recreation of the first scene from the first film, with characters who amount to Matrix superfans offering commentary on what's new and different. So let me say this. The Matrix Resurrections' use of trauma as a seemingly trendy buzzword is similarly in conversation with modern blockbusters culture. The analyst's innovation of trauma isn't meant as a strike against the concept of trauma as one that blinds us to the true nature of reality. It's a strike against anyone who would use trauma as an all-purpose boogeyman. It's a strike against trauma as a cheap storytelling device. If we fans demand that our favourite characters return again and again, then we never afford them any sort of final peace or closure. We are asking them to consistently relive their own worst moments. In the name of our entertainment, we are inadvertently trapping them in the trauma spiral, and then in stories that insist you can comfort your trauma and blow it up if you're motivated. I mentioned earlier, I think Resurrection's use of trauma within its story is incisive, and those nods to broader blockbuster culture are why. The Matrix Resurrections doesn't just have a complex understanding of trauma and how it affects people, though it does have that. Deep down, The Matrix Resurrections is making the audience undergo CPT right alongside Neo. In the early scenes featuring the analyst, I felt at once alienated by the film's portrayal of mental health care and deeply drawn to it. The alienation stemmed from how the movie seemed like it was portraying the therapeutic processes that had saved my life as literal tools of the machine. The analyst, if we look at him more closely, isn't a particularly good trauma therapist, even if his actual goal is to keep Neo blinded to the nature of his reality. He writes off Neo's unpleasant hallucinations as no big deal. Any good trauma specialist will understand just how painful a deeply disorientating traumatic flashback would be for their patient. What's more, the analyst reveals late in the film that he recovered Neo and Trinity's dead bodies and rebuilt them. He's the one who literally resurrected them. If we're talking about super fans trapping characters in traumatic spirals, then the analyst does that very thing with Neo and Trinity. He doesn't allow them even the closure of death. He resurrects them and forces them back into the roles he likes best. Ineffectual drones who are forever yearning to be together, but never quite connecting. It's worth noting here that Resurrections is at its core a swooning, wonderful romance. But look beyond the analyst's purposeful incompetence, and the scenes featuring Neo in therapy capture the weird allure of trauma. Here is what I mean. Very early on in my own journey through my darkest memories, confronting my past felt so painful that I could hardly stand it. But it also felt real in a way too few things in my life to that point had felt. It really did feel like I was breaking free of a simulation designed to anesthetize me. And the deeper I traveled, the more I realized my brain had simply boxed up dozens of memories vaguely related to my pain in the name of keeping me safe. Yes, I didn't have access to memories of the abuse except in fleeting memory bursts that I left myself as signposts to get myself where I needed to go. Neo, who frequently has quick flashes of memory from the original trilogy, has these too. But I also had buried happier memories. A boy I made out with at camp, a girl I loved in high school, a night when my wife and I had an affirming conversation about my gender long before I came out. My life was kept from me. I should have always had a good and bad. Instead, I had the antagonizing effect of a story agreed upon, a simulation my abuser had trapped me in. There's a dangerous magnetism to trauma early on. You know it might kill you if you look too closely at it. You also can't imagine looking at anything else. It feels more real than what you think of as reality. And in the scenes in Resurrections, when Neo forces himself to start to look at all of the painful things in his past, things he believes are simply story points in his video games, he's experiencing that powerful, painful feeling of the bottom of reality dropping out. The analyst isn't using therapeutic techniques to help Neo, he's using them to control Neo. The analyst is an abuser, trapping Neo in an endless simulation to keep him placid. Once Neo breaks free of the analyst and actually starts confronting his own past, he meets people who actually know how to help him process and move on. A new character played by Jessica Henwick, the super rad ship captain Bugs, who rescues Neo from the Matrix, isn't textually a mental health professional, but she serves as a mirror image of the analyst. She too is a Matrix fan, but she's a Matrix fan who wants to help Neo move on to another phase of his story and his life. She wants him to change and be capable of change. We can want that for him too. As Resurrections enters its second half, Neo goes on what amounts to be a cognitive processing therapy speedrun. He is able to ground himself in the actual present and realize how much time has passed since the events of the original films. 60 years, it turns out. He is able to recognize the systems of control that held him in place. He is able to fight back against them and destroy them. He is able to save the love of his life from the similar prison she is held in, because he recognizes it for what it is. He grows, he changes, and he matures. Too many stories about trauma believe that trauma is a singular event, a monstrous occurrence that survivors can never outrun or escape. But what I've learned and what the Matrix Resurrections understands is that trauma is not an event, but a continuation. A terrible thing happens, or many terrible things happen, and the shadows elongate all around you until they seem to make up the very world you inhabit. They rob you of your memories, of your power, of your ability to change. They place you in a prison that they trick you into building for yourself, then convince you escape is impossible. Yet the Matrix movies have always been about rising above the prison of the self. This newest film is, too. As Resurrections ends, Neo and Trinity have taken control of the simulation. They finally have the perspective they need to take control of their lives. They fly through the sky, flirting, dancing. Up here, they can see everything. I think this piece right here by Emily Vanderwerf is beautiful, and it is an unbelievable interpretation of the Matrix Resurrections. And when watching this movie, when watching Neo go through this cycle of the same day over and over again, dealing with his depression, his anxiety, wanting something new, finding his purpose, being told what he should be, he should make a Matrix 4, I relate to that big time. And it made me feel sad for the character, feel bad for the character. And yes, there is humorous moments in the movie where he is going through those struggles, but I didn't laugh once at all. Because it was relatable. Because I've gone through something similar. I've been broken mentally, physically, and I've come back from it. From years and years of abuse. But I rebuilt myself. I had to take control. I had to realize where I was and what was happening. And when I got the time to rebuild myself, I could control my simulation, my world, who I am. And Neo has to go through that as well in this movie. And then he has to save Trinity. And if you've been in a family with abuse, you have to save yourself. You have to save the other people who's been abused as well. And I think many people can relate to that as well. You might not be able to pinpoint it exactly why you feel so bad for Neo, why you relate to him. But if you dig a little bit deeper, if you watch the movie again and again, you'll probably pick up that Neo is a survivor of trauma. For 60 years, he was experimented on. He was drugged. His true self was taken from him. He was told what he was instead of him saying what he was. He was used by the analyst. Not because the analyst felt for his mental health or for his trauma, but he contained his trauma because that's what powered this new Matrix. That's what gave the new Matrix the best power the Matrix ever had. And I'm glad people are understanding this about the movie. When I said in my review that this is a misunderstood, unique sequel, I had comments from people saying there wasn't enough action. Where was bullet time? Where was the 360 cam? Where was the things that made the original great? And I'm like, that's not the point of this movie whatsoever. This is a sequel about not wanting to make a sequel. Lana Wachowski was basically Neo in this movie, dealing with the trauma of her parents' death. That's why she came back to make this movie. Having the discussion with Jonathan Groff's character about Warner Brothers want to make a fourth game. And Neo's like, what? I don't really want to do that. But he was made to do it unless he broke free. And Lana Wachowski went through something very similar as well. But I think this is a beautiful piece. It really, really is. And not many movies I can relate to in terms of trauma. One of them is Honey Boy, starring Shia LaBeouf, which is kind of a semi-biographic kind of take on his upbringing as a child actor, his abuse from his father and stuff like that. I could relate to that story big time, but there's not many other stories I could relate to. But there was something about the Matrix Resurrections that spoke to me. It didn't tell me exactly how to feel. It just spoke to me when I was watching it, and I felt for the character. When people were laughing at those scenes, I felt bad for the character. I just wanted to take him from that world he was in. And if you're going through something similar, you feel like you're going through some sort of simulation, you're being abused, you can come out of it. You can. It takes a lot. It takes years of rebuilding yourself mentally, which then carries over to the outside, but it is possible, and I was able to do it. And it sounds like the author of this piece, Emily, was able to do it, Neo was able to do it, Trinity was able to do it, so why can't you? It takes a lot of work, it's hard work, but The Matrix Resurrections, guys, is such a deep film that keeps going and going and going. It's more than just a sequel. That's why it's a misunderstood, unique sequel. And that's why I have to agree with Emily, who says too many movies right now are about trauma. But The Matrix Resurrections actually does the work. It tells a beautiful story. It doesn't say this film's about trauma. It doesn't have it in the title. But it's there. And if you've gone through anything like that in your life, you can spot it. You can see it straight away. You can pick it up straight away. And probably the people in the theatre or at home who are laughing to those scenes, who are calling this movie shit, and it's not a true sequel, it's ruining the franchise, then you completely missed the point. Because it wasn't supposed to be what you wanted it to be. What the analysts wanted it to be. It was supposed to be what Lana Wachowski wanted it to be. To tell the story of trauma. Of telling the story of what it can do to you as a person and also as an artist. And also, social media can trap you into that even more. Because when you're going through something so personal, you don't want anybody to know. So your Instagram account, your Twitter, you want to be cool, you want to be trendy, you want to be happy. You want to blind people from what's actually going on. So you build up an avatar. And Jim Carrey has talked about this before as well. Depression is basically you trying to hold up this fake avatar to people, and in your body your mind just breaks down because you can't do it anymore, and you get depressed and you get suicidal because you can't keep telling this lie that you're okay, that you're great, when obviously you're not. You have to take down that avatar, you have to build yourself back up. You really, really do. And this film is definitely about trauma and dealing with it. And Lana Wachowski, this was her way of dealing with it, and I think it's done in such a beautiful way that will last the test of time longer than these bad reviews do. And just to finish, I want to talk about the point that Emily made about fans wanting the old characters to come back. You want maybe Han Solo, Luke Skywalker. You want Christian Bale, Michael Keaton to come back. You want Harry Potter to come back. You want Neo to come back. But when do these characters get to rest? When do these characters get to go away from the pain, the trauma, and to just reflect and to rebuild and to just rest and live out their days happy? When do we as fans start asking for them just to find peace, to find solace? Why do we want sequels and reboots for the same character to endure so much pain and suffering? And then you have the Marvel movies, who you have these heroes that go through so much to save the world and humanity, but it never affects them. It hardly ever does. And the way that they deal with it is by fighting. And Neo in this movie can't fight the way that he used to because he's been drugged, he's been experimented on, and people are like, why can't he fight? Why can't he just do the cool stuff from the original? Because of what's happened to him, his trauma. He's dealing with it in a different way. He doesn't want to fight anymore. He's tired. He said it in Matrix 3, I think it was as well, and Matrix 4 with Morpheus. I don't want to do this. I don't want to fight. That's a very interesting thought that I never thought about before in terms of our heroes and making them go through pain over and over again in a loop or a simulation. But guys, what's your thoughts on the Matrix Resurrections actually being about trauma and not being about what people wanted it to be, not being Ghostbusters Afterlife or Spider-Man No Way Home, that nostalgia feeling, the bullet time, the 360 cam, the kicks, everything. It didn't want to be that, but people are upset. I think it was a beautiful story about love, about romance, about trauma, about rebuilding yourself, breaking the cycle, the simulation, finding yourself again. But guys, what's your thoughts on The Matrix Resurrections? Did you like the movie? Is there something in this movie that I didn't spot, that Emily didn't spot, that others haven't spot, but it spoke to you because of your life experiences, because of what you've gone through in your own life? I'm sure there is something that I didn't see and others haven't yet. That's the beautiful thing about movies. They're subjective, but also they're pieces of art that can live on for years to come, and we pick up new things. And with The Matrix Resurrections, every single day I'm picking up new things about the story, the characters, the setting, what it was trying to be and what it was trying not to be. Guys, thanks very much. Give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you like this one, check out my other Matrix videos, come follow me on all my social media accounts, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. And whatever you're going through, no matter what it is, you can break free, you can rebuild yourself again. You can, you're strong enough to do it. I did it, others have done it. Neo is a great example in this movie of doing it. You can do it. Break free and find yourself, find your purpose in life, and I wish you the best. Thanks for watching, guys.